we are ready to get started with our next speaker. I am pleased to introduce Dr. Christiane Donoghue, who is the director of the Institute for Writing and Rhetoric at Dartmouth University, as well as an associate professor of linguistics there. She is widely published in a variety of areas, including translingualism and cross-cultural writing. She's currently working on a couple of very interesting projects at Dartmouth, one of which is a study of 2,100 student essays being coded by 15 faculty members to create a descriptive study looking for program outcomes in student writing. And she also recently received a Provost grant to study all the scholarship on writing in languages other than English, covering 15 countries in Europe, and she has a year to do that work, so good luck with that. And I am pleased again to invite Tian to the stage, so please welcome her with me.
Yeah, I won't be doing that project alone, trust me. So, hi everybody, and thanks for being here. I know some people left after lunch. Thank you, Joe, for inviting me. I really appreciate it. It's really funny to be up on a stage with a speaker with a small group of people, most of whom I know. But hey, there's also that large group of people out there in the world. Hello to all of you. Okay. My talk will definitely be a little different from the others. It's a little bit more meta. I'm not really reporting on a study, although we are engaged in studies at Dartmouth in line with the focus here today. I've actually been doing a lot of thinking, and I really want to sort of informally share that thinking with you. It's a kind of an experiment, so let's hope it works. It's really a question of just that, of reflection. We're having a lot thrown at us these days about research, about assessment, about big data, and about globalizing forces. And I took this opportunity when Joe asked me to do this to try to put some of that into some kind of a coherent perspective, hopefully coherent perspective, offering a sense of the overall United States and European landscape into which the work that we're hearing about here today fits. So the European focus of my work comes from my research community there, which is part of why I'm doing that project that Lauren described before. And I've been working there for about 20 years with writing researchers and with teachers across Europe, so you'll hear a little bit about some of that. I'll try to explore some, sorry, I'm forgetting to do my slides, that's not helpful. I will try to explore how some traditional empirical research in its quantitative form developed more in sort of international or interdisciplinary research domains rather than the traditional composition domain, and big data and analytics relate to each other as we seek what writing knowledge is and how writers adapt and transform and repurpose it. I'll offer just quick examples of research to build this out. Most of my examples are not going to introduce to many of you any new techniques, especially after you heard Joe and Val this morning. But they will, I hope, map the overall interdependency of research strands, the sort of complex long-term developments that have led us to where we are. Someone asked, as this colloquium was being advertised, how is it global? To me, the digital tools that are useful to writing research are tools that are developed globally, tools that connect us to global questions and pressing global needs, tools that indeed are sometimes part of the existing global research traditions that we might know less well in the United States. That is, digital tools for researching writing connect us all in the global research landscape as a way to become global researchers. New awareness of digital tools for research is growing as well. Ultimately, I hope, with the few examples I have to offer, that we can locate digital research tools as well as big data and analytics in both a trajectory and a landscape of digital possibilities for research. Not necessarily brand new, but grounded and situated in ongoing work and affording new approaches and new knowledge. I think, too, though, that lessons learned from earlier research using digital tools might help us to avoid mistakes in new research approaches. Basically, my first half is going to cover the up until now sort of version of the things I'll talk about, and my second half will talk about the now moving forward part of what we're looking at. Sorry, I'm a little bit off on my slides, I apologize. Okay, so let me start with that big first part about sort of up until now, with some examples of European and United States empirical research traditions in studies of writing. This is just a quick overview of the ones that I'm going to talk about, and then I'll go into more detail on each one. These are all approaches that use methods that have been in play since the 1960s or 70s or so in different domains. So the corpus-based approach, the keystroke logging and eye tracking research approach, and the longitudinal research approach, which I actually will talk about very little. And then I'll talk a little bit about their affordances before going to the current version of things. Digital tools have long been in use in corpus linguistics, corpus-based discourse analysis, and so on, pretty much since the mid-20th century. That's been often, although not always, less familiar to United States composition and rhetoric or writing studies audiences. Joe's work, Zach Dixon's work, some of Chris's work, being among the few exceptions to that. You've seen what the results can be this morning from that kind of work. I'm going to backtrack into what this research has been because the term is being used now, the term of corpus research, and because it has sometimes had a difficult past in United States research, in particular in writing studies. And so I want to sort of backtrack into it and really talk a little bit about what it has been leading up to where we are today. So linguists, generally speaking, are interested in the usage-based or the corpus-based approach to analysis in order to better understand language in use that's naturally occurring in settings. The strength of corpus data includes its empirical nature, the pooling of extensive possible data, and the potential objectivity of the analysis. Of course, there are plenty of limits as well, and some of those limits are part of what made it something that writing studies did not cotton to very much at first. But some of what those limits are has actually shifted a lot recently. So one of the examples is the acontextuality of these analyses has often been a criticism of corpus-based studies, linguistics ones in particular. But that's been altered by newer digital tools that allow corpus markup and annotation. McHenry and Zhao note that many available corpora are now encoded with textual and sociolinguistic metadata, things like register and genre and domain, user, gender, age, that kind of thing, that make it possible to cross-reference data with that kind of information. It's something that was actually evoked a little bit this morning in terms of retention, student retention, and having that kind of data about students other than what's in the study. A workable corpus for this kind of study has been something that's representative of what's being studied, and also that's machine readable, right? It's a key feature. It can be finite, a sort of a set corpus, or it can be a constantly evolving corpus. Researchers have used different types of text analysis software to do these analyses over time. Joe mentioned AntConc as one. There are lots of others. They all have in common the idea that they're trying to facilitate quantitative analysis and enable analysts quickly and easily to collect, to sort, and to manipulate the linguistic discursive data in the corpus. They're looking, for example, for keywords, for frequency, for words in their contexts, for collocations, for clusters, characteristic word sequences, things like that. The analytic purpose has been to aid researchers, and this is maybe very important for us, in identifying typical patterns of language usage that frequently escape intuitions of speakers or teachers, complementing or refuting the intuitions of those individual researchers. Worth, I think, thinking about in terms of what we're trying to do. In terms of writing studies interests, primarily, again, European, corpus analysts have studied genre knowledge, grammatical knowledge, and citation practices. They've created reference corpora for working with first and second language speakers. Some corpus analysts have suggested that the corpus approach has the potential, but hasn't yet been used for, to chart growth patterns, such as whether students' arguments become more complex as their education progresses, whether students have learned to integrate material from different sources in their conclusions, or whether vocabulary students use becomes more specialized as they advance. The field is certainly wide open right now in the United States for picking up these questions. The Michigan Corpus of Upper-Level Student Papers has already begun to take this on in sort of a very broad way. They have a huge bank of student essays that are being studied qualitatively and quantitatively for writing development and for genre variation and for disciplinary differences. So that's one United States example. A very recent UK publication promises to be an excellent example of what corpus studies are beginning to offer to writing studies. It's called the First Year University Writing, a corpus-based study with implications for pedagogy. And it analyzed 19,000 student essays for rhetorical and linguistic and discourse features in order to try to offer a description. Very often the initial linguistic purpose is to describe, right, rather than to evaluate. Another well-developed use of digital analysis tools in the corpus domain is in translation studies. Our US field's recent interest in translation as composition and in translingual pedagogies could really benefit from this particular history of corpus analysis. In the 1990s, scholars in translation studies, first among them Mona Baker, called for explicit and coherent methodology of corpus research in translation. Corpus-based translation studies became shortly after that the new paradigm in the field of translation studies sometime in the late 1990s. Corpus analysis of spoken interpreting had been happening for a long time but was very challenging because it was really hard, very time-consuming to do the transcripts of that spoken, a lot like we have trouble with the amount of time it takes to do transcripts of interviews. So the big advance there was that corpus translation studies didn't have that limitation, and so it sort of exploded. In translation, in the field of translation, and this seems to counterbalance the commonly held view that corpus analysis can be very limiting or limited, Baker noted that the availability of large corpora of both original and translated texts, together with development of a corpus-driven methodology, will enable scholars to uncover the nature of translated texts as a mediated communicative event. So something much deeper and richer than maybe what corpus studies had been associated with. Comparative studies, as sort of a subclass of corpus linguistics, have also benefited from the same type of analysis, specifically for the purpose of cross-cultural or cross-disciplinary work. Back in the late 1990s, actually, one of the first studies I did was a cross-cultural analysis of student writing from France and from the United States, a corpus of that writing. And I used automatic coding then, but it was a system that no one's ever seen again. It was developed by an education professor at Northeastern in the basement of Lake Hall, and I don't think anyone other than he and I ever used it. But it was even then definitely a method that I meant to use to lead to deeper analysis of what the corpus analysis was showing me. It's one of the values I see in corpus work, is that it can point us to things that we want to look at even more. It's one of the many values that I see. The last area is teaching, and I'm really not going to talk about it because I don't have time, but just to let you know, there's a huge amount of work in terms of how corpus-based writing research can actually be very useful in teaching, not only in terms of us studying what students are doing, but also in terms of us teaching students how to do it as a way for them to then better understand what they're doing with writing. It's something that's been done in language studies for decades, and it actually fits the writing about writing approach pretty well, so it's an interesting possibility. Another set of digital tools is the eye tracking and keystroke logging set. These offer insights into the thorny, complex issue of development of writing ability, this time from a very cognitive perspective, quite a different approach. Eye tracking and keystroke logging tools are designed to gain empirical evidence into external aspects of writing behavior and development. Luc Van Wees and Marielle Leijten, leading voices in the keystroke logging research in Europe, which is pretty much the birthplace of this particular kind of research, note that these two tools work by establishing the eye's path and movement and the hand's data entry movements to reconstruct and to describe text production processes, enabling basically a detailed replay of a text as it unfolded. The main premise is that writing fluency and flow reveal traces of underlying cognitive processes via observing formulation and transcription processes in order to infer the cognitive processes that underlie them. And they do that via pauses and revision moves in the writer's activity. The measures are indirect, obviously, though more recently, the people who are very involved in keystroke logging and eye tracking have reintroduced, in complement to the work that they do, an approach that US compositionists will recognize right away from a long time ago in our field, which is think aloud protocols. And what they're seeing, right, Van Wees and Leichen emphasize the ease and the efficiency of keystroke logging, but the importance of being able to bring in other insights. So the why, for example, of pauses or moves. Maybe similar to what discourse-based interviews did for text analysis, right, along those lines. Keystroke loggers have studied a wide range of writers' processes, general cognitive strategies, strategies of different types of writers or contexts, expert or novice comparisons, translators and how they work, and so on. They also study keystroke logging in conjunction with eye tracking as a way to study the reading-writing interaction that's happening as students write. Some studies of student college writers have measured their writing pauses as they produce text, their transitions between areas of interest in their text under production, their cycles of source consultation online, which I find particularly interesting, and then their text itself, the content analysis of the text itself. It's becoming more and more common to study the way that writers search for information as they compose, with multi-screen studies, with findings that include things like tasks with different focuses and audiences provoke different kinds of searches, or novice writers reach back to the sources they are consulting far more often than expert writers do. It seems to me, having heard Suzanne this morning, and Chris actually as well, what a great complementary set of sort of data points we could get from that to go along with the kind of work that the Citation Project or some of the other things that we heard from Chris talked about. Van Wees and Leichten note that these possibilities were born essentially with the personal computer and have continuously evolved since. Currently, the work is tapping into dynamic network analysis to further study source interaction. It's tapping into data mining to further study patterns in the aggregate data across keystroke logging files. And it's tapping into corpus analysis to gain more insight into the actual text produced by the students who were studied in the keystroke logging and eye tracking work. The third one that I will talk about is the longitudinal studies, sort of large-scale longitudinal studies, and I'm actually going to not talk about it, even though I just said I would. I just wanted to give you this slide and say I think that there's a lot in terms of what's happening with longitudinal studies that is ripe for the possibility of bringing in some of the corpus analysis approaches, and it hasn't quite happened yet, partly because, and Joe pointed this out actually in some of his articles, partly because for a long time people who were doing longitudinal studies didn't collect the data electronically. So they didn't set themselves up for the possibility. It's a lot harder to do it if you haven't collected it electronically. But I think that it's also true that the longitudinal studies have a lot to offer the corpus studies. So I think that the two together could be a really powerful thing, but we don't have time to talk about it, so I'm not gonna go into that right now. Summary for this first part, what have these approaches actually afforded for us over time? And I'll just summarize this pretty quickly before talking about the second part. So I think that they have offered us depth, layered detail, they've offered rigorous method, they've also offered ways to capture complexity in terms of what's happening, each in a particular domain. They've also afforded attention to the intersection of cognitive developmental and process phenomena, so how those two work together. They have definitely laid the groundwork via corpus research for the next step, right? In writing studies, I think we can now say, this is not your grandmother's corpus. It's something else, it's big data, right? It's a different thing. But it's prepared by the work that was done before. The ones that are using digital tools often provide, the studies using digital tools often provide what Cheryl Ball has called boutique data, or dark data. I like the dark data, but I'll talk about boutique data. A term that they're using in connection with big data that I will come back to in the second part. So these are things that I think these approaches, largely either outside of the sort of traditional composition rhetoric discipline or outside of United States research traditions in terms of higher education writing, have to me really prepared the way for the big data research trend that we are currently seeing. They've prepared the way for these new approaches, enabled now by very large data sets and digital analytical tools. to complement and to extend our knowledge-making practices without overwhelming them and without imagining them as the only way forward. So to me, they're key, a new, innovative, powerful piece in that overall landscape, but they are in a landscape, and that's kind of the part that I'm hoping to emphasize. I'll go into my second part now, which is shorter than the first part, to talk about the ways in which that previous work connects to and prepares us for and forecasts the big data and analytics work is specifically in writing studies. While I talk about this, I just want to emphasize that I know some of this will sound like I'm sort of going back over definitions of what appear to be very basic key terms that we all accept, like big data or analytics. But I don't know that we always do take the time to do that, to sort of stop and say, well, wait a minute. What do we mean by big data? What do we mean by analytics? These words that our administrators throw at us all the time and that we throw at each other all the time. And specifically, why are they interesting and useful and helpful or potentially not helpful in some ways to writing studies? So I want to take a brief closer look at that piece, backtracking to some of what those are. Joe's team has clearly shown some exciting projects. One of the exciting aspects of big data and analytics is, in fact, the attention that that kind of project is bringing to empirical work and to evidence and to data, but to data of a particular kind, right? I mean, we've always all been working with data, right? But now we've got a different kind of data that we're thinking about. So the question to me is how the traditional research using digital tools and the big data research might intersect and interact and complement each other. So I'll just be quickly talking about what are big data, what are analytics, how are they taking shape in terms of writing studies, and what might they afford that we don't get any other way. Okay, so we'll give that a try. So starting with big data, it's a term that's used to describe the new context of abundance. It indicates data sets whose size is beyond the ability of typical database software tools to capture, store, manage, and analyze. Its roots appear to be decidedly in the capitalist models of marketing and design. Most initial big data attention was in the world of business and entrepreneurship, right? And then political science. Eventually domains like public health. And it's well worth thinking about that because it does inflect what it is that it may or may not do for us, so our adaptation really matters. The thing about big data is that it's unstructured. Laura calls it unruly stuff like words, images, industrial data sensors, media streams. Digital tools that are being developed now can basically tame that data, if you want to think about it that way, including natural language processing tools, pattern recognition tools, machine learning. The combination of massive unstructured data and tools that can tame it is what I'd like to call big data, those two things coming together. Big data also allows for new forms of data mining, which again is a tool that has been around for a long time, but is currently, leaping ahead. Data mining, seen as the process of collecting, searching through, and analyzing a large amount of data in a database in order to discover patterns or relationships that you wouldn't find any other way. It certainly isn't new, but it's been rapidly improving in accuracy because of evolutions in processing power and disk storage and statistical software. And then there's learning analytics. Analytics in general, like big data, are not grounded initially in educational interests, but learning analytics, of course, seeks to adapt analytics for specific issues of learning. There's certainly crossover between the concepts of big data and the process of learning analytics. One recent article by Long and Siemens notes, and you'll hear an echo here of the kind of thing that Chris was talking about this morning, every click, every tweet or Facebook status update, every social interaction, and every page read online can leave a digital footprint, as can online learning, digital student records, student cards, sensors, and mobile devices. Data trails and activity streams. Everything is capturable. It's quite similar in principle, I think, to some of the keystroke logging and eye tracking work. Learning analytics focuses on what we can glean about what is happening in the learning process from these data trails and activity streams. But, and this is really important, analytics identifies these features basically by proxy, right? So time on task, frequency of visits to sites, content pages viewed, et cetera. That's a key sort of piece of it. The idea is that this should lead to ideas for improving teaching and learning, as well as for tracking students at risk. Atif Richards Bilgin, and Marone note that learning analytics seeks to predict learners' performance, as we saw this morning, suggest relevant learning resources, increase learner reflection and awareness, detect undesirable learning behaviors, I'm not sure about that undesirable word, but, or counterproductive emotional states, and suggest good resources. Sorry, a little too quick. In particular, it involves data mining for what has been termed actionable insights. I've also heard that described as action analytics, a term that evokes for me deeply shared premises with another longstanding writing research approach in both Europe and the United States, action research, right? So what's that connection across those two? I would not equate analytics with research any more than I would automatically equate assessment with research, but I find the underlying possibilities and drive and sort of intent very interesting. One last note about learning analytics. Experts in learning analytics note that using analytics requires that we think carefully about what we need to know and which data is most likely to tell us what we need to know. That was a very current quote from somebody working in learning analytics, and to me it's a great example of why this approach is essentially an evolution of a long-standing tradition in research. I mean, that kind of careful thinking is at the heart of any educational query. It's not specific to learning analytics or to big data. The call to think this way should be ubiquitous to me, much bigger than just what we find in analytics. So how are these taking shape in terms of writing studies? Where are we in this development? Of course, the example of Joe Moxley's work and his colleagues' work in writing studies is key. You heard that from them this morning. I'm not going to repeat what they said, but I am going to take some time to note why it is that Joe's work exemplifies some of the ways big data is valuable to writing studies, with a couple of gentle points of pushback as well that I hope Joe will take in good spirit as they come out. I'll also say just in passing that I find Joe's work very valuable, but I'm not sure that the big data aspect of it is actually what makes it the most interesting. There are lots of other things that make it just as interesting or maybe even more interesting. The two pieces in particular I'm thinking about are Everything is Illuminated, What Big Data Can Tell Us About Teacher Commentary with Zach Dixon, and what can we learn from 70,282 peer reviews and predictive analytics with Alan Friedman. In Everything is Illuminated, for example, the thousands and thousands of teacher comments analyzed brought insights into the practices of instructor feedback. Joe and Zach Dixon point to the tools that allowed them to assemble, sort, categorize, and analyze a highly complex set of data. While the tools themselves have been in use in other disciplines and in international research traditions, we have not had large sets of student or teacher work available electronically on which to work. My Reviewers brings these two together and changes the scope of the possible as a result. Another parallel data discussion that's informing our understanding of the value of big data, to me, is Cheryl Ball's notion of boutique data. And that notion of boutique data is something that they've developed actually in connection to big data, or maybe in response to big data. It's actually sort of come out of that. It's a term used to talk about the kind of data we often have in writing studies, but that has not attained the sort of big status in terms of numbers of data points. They say, in the rush to embrace big data as a funding stream for large networked humanities projects, researchers in RetComp and the digital humanities might miss the value of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of uncounted data sets that we already have. Boutique data is meant to designate the plethora of those currently inaccessible sets of qualitative and quantitative data that exist behind much of humanities scholarship, small, local, but when combined, potentially deep and rich. And that is, in fact, a model for European writing research that's very much in play, the sort of sets of small that are always in conversation with each other rather than existing in isolated places where nobody accesses them. It's data that we may not have noticed if we hadn't been having the big data discussion. This is part of why it's so interesting. Ball, Graben, and Seidler also argue that making data publicly available and accessible, as well as aggregable for comparison and analysis, is surely as important to writing studies as making journals open access in terms of moving knowledge forward. They suggest specifically that data should be made in public in collaboratories rather than repositories, representing an environment in which researchers can leverage the mutability of shared data and communication tools, facilitating networks of research teams, and promoting cross-pollination of inquiry and data and projects. In so many ways, this is the research version of a rethinking of the lonely writer in her garret. And again, it's one of the things that makes writing studies special in this big data discussion. Special as in we have a special place that I think could be even more powerful because of our history than in a lot of other fields. It also implies giving writing research a much larger place in the profiles of university writing positions, which should be good. Not likely to happen anytime soon. We're not likely to get the same kind of time as the scientists. And finally, a little bit on learning analytics in this discussion. I think that, to my eye, learning analytics will actually require much more of a guiding hand in writing studies going forward than the broader big data discussion. For example, learning analytics works so much by proxy, right, that we will want to continue to focus smaller studies as well on the deeper questions, the why, the layered points of information that build full pictures. In a kind of a reversal of attention, as much as big data and learning analytics have become centers of attention, it's the careful research methods and the resistance to what the Europeans call applicationism, long stalwarts of European writing research, that are now needed more than ever as a way to hold these new models to accountability for themselves. Another key concern in the consideration of learning analytics in relation to writing development is in its focus on bits of learning. Competencies and parts of competencies, bits of activity serving to flag learning in linear progression or in frequency are certainly valuable to our view on learning. And it's one that's hard to find in any other way outside of analytics. But synthesis and deep learning are another kind of learning and knowledge, and I think that they need to be included as well. And then finally, on this set of sort of why writing studies is particularly important, there's yet to be developed, to my knowledge, any cross-fertilization between models of cognitive development and the surface behaviors that we see tracked in much of learning analytics. So that's a sort of waiting. I think that writing studies could actually break ground in that particular area. Okay, I am almost done. I know I'm almost out of time. Oops, sorry, a little too fast. So I think that there are particularly important things that writing studies working with big data and analytics afford that we can't get any other way. Some of them you've already seen in the work this morning. Certainly the speed and efficiency that Joe has often detailed are a major opportunity. The number of people who can be implicated in these kinds of projects is another transformative affordance. It's so much easier to involve large numbers of people in this kind of work than it has been in the past. I think that the keystroke logging and eye tracking scholars in Europe see clear value of sort of the new graphic and statistical data analysis techniques, mainly adapted from network analysis and data mining. They see those as sort of the way forward, and I think that that's a point that's unique to working with big data. The notion of sharing data and of what that might make possible is particularly important. And finally, the call for sharing data sets to make larger analyses possible is also a way to open us up to critiquing ourselves. Because the more your data is out there and available for other people to look at and see and work with, the more people can question what it is you did with that data. And that kind of openness to sort of questioning ourselves and critique, I think, is particularly important. I put all of the next things on one slide because I knew it would be near the end and I would probably run out of time. So they're all there. You can look at them all. I'll just go through them very quickly. They're my last actual substantial slide. So these are sort of considerations for the future and possible, not exactly cautions, just challenges, things to think about that I think we'll want to work on going forward. The large-scale analyses that are developing now give very strong big picture understandings and point us towards patterns that are worth further exploration, but they don't give us a way to explore complex individual issues in context. This is something that actually Joe and Zach Dixon have explicitly pointed out in some of their work. Every aspect uncovered in the studies I've read leads us to say, okay, this is really interesting. So how? How did it happen? Why is it happening? Where is it, right? So all those other pieces sort of get called out by this work. It gives important pieces of a large puzzle that traditional empirical quantitative research fills as well. I think that the contours of traditions of empirical quantitative research remind us that big data and analytics alone will not provide all we need, nor will the earlier models. I might further suggest that making sense of the results of big data studies demands a kind of research knowledge that our US field of writing research has not been terribly good at providing to new scholars. The same kind of knowledge traditional research provides. Joe's team can do this kind of work effectively. How many people in the United States can? So it's an important question. The effect size conversation is one that I haven't heard evoked at all, and that I think it's waiting to be had. I've heard this summer, actually, for the first time at a conference in Europe, I heard somebody talking about effect size as the conversation of the future. Effect size is the issue of what size does to your results, right? So it's actually because of the size, you're more likely to find what you're looking for. Right? The bigger the size, the more it may be that what you're looking for is going to show itself. So how that plays with the sort of other point people have made about big data, which is that it's the size that gives us strength, is an interesting conversation. Big data research claims notwithstanding, I think making claims about the act of writing based on qualitative analysis of small data sets does not seem so much anachronistic to me as just one small part of this tapestry, this sort of landscape moving forward. Evidence-based curriculum changes are often cited as the goals of learning analytics in particular, which raises another question, I think, for us. How do we continue to tease out assessment in relation to research and actionable insight or applied results in relation to sort of pure research? And finally, absence of attention to the cognitive is an area begging for more interaction, I think. And European scholars who have been doing that work for a long, long time are the ones who I think are very ready to work together with us on how we bring all those different kinds of insights together. Call me overly cautious, but I will also say that big data and analytics really are grounded in corporate perspectives that do have the potential to get away from us. So it's a good thing to keep in mind. My concluding thought, as we see the research afforded by digital tools evolve, both in big data sets and in smaller ones, we can learn so much by entering into the landscape of these tools and uses and kinds of data. I'd like to see us work together on the global possibilities. Thank you. And I'm sorry if I took a little too long. I don't know if there's any questions. I think so, because I think people can't hear you who are joining by web if you don't have the microphone.
And I think that that's really compelling, right? This idea that there's lots of information, data sitting out there that we should be trying to get access to. Do you have any thoughts about the sort of logistical, infrastructural components of that, right? So when we digitize data, that is not, like the cloud is not a real thing, right? It's actual servers that have to be housed somewhere and someone has to care for that data and steward it and the software involved. So have you, I mean, that's a really big question, but I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about it.
You should read the 2 or 3 articles by Cheryl Ball and her colleagues. They actually talk about some of the efforts people currently have underway to do that. One of them is REX, the research exchange that's connected to the Writing Across the Curriculum Clearinghouse. Right now it's not open, but it had been open for 3 or 4 years for people to simply post studies and data in a way that would then be searchable by other people. So they're definitely thinking about it, but they did run into the logistics problem of, okay, at what point, how do we actually make it work all the time for everybody? So they might not have gotten anywhere with that yet. There's a European equivalent of that called Writing Pro. You can find it online, and it's the same idea. It's people posting their smaller studies in ways that make it accessible to other people so that you start to have access to that, not just to the informal research that maybe never got published, but to the actual data that people are working with. Note that in the sciences, people post their data all the time, right? We're the only ones who don't, right? So it's just something to think about in terms of how,
Because I was thinking about things like GitHub, right, where people in the sciences frequently post, and people in computer science will post code to share, and whether there are tools that other people have already built that we can use or leverage in some way. So I'm
Yeah,
glad
the
you
people I
mentioned
know who are
scientists.
working on that are Cheryl and her team. So I would just reach out to them because I know that they're actively trying to make that happen, and I know that they're working with some of the people who have already begun to try to make it happen. Yeah, both in the States and in Europe.
Thank you. That was a great talk. And one thing I just wanted to mention at Joe's very kind urging is that at Notre Dame, where I'm from, we're working on, this is an example of boutique data, we're working on taking all of the Writing Center data. I don't know if any of you use something like WC Online or Tutor Track, or is it Track Tutor?
Yeah,
Uh,
Tutor Track.
That, I think, is an excellent example of boutique data. And what we're doing at Notre Dame is we're taking this data. We have, for instance, about 22,000 tutor notes over the last 5 years, so that's a nice longitudinal data set. And we're trying to take this data and establish a model for sharing data cross-institutionally. So at some of the larger schools, you probably have hundreds of thousands of these tutor notes. And that's a really gorgeous data set, especially if we're able to, let's say, share it between different partner universities and make it open access like journals.
Yeah.
So yeah, I enjoyed your
Thanks.
talk tremendously.
One of the things that I really like about Cheryl's articles and work is that she keeps making that point, that open access to data is just as important as open access to journals, right? So it's really interesting to sort of read her argument about that and hear, it's a team of people actually, and hear what they have to say. It's really hard to see people from up here.
Sorry. I just have I guess a small comment / concern after everything that's been said today. And I know, I get it. I think I get it. I got the title of today's, what we're dealing with here. But the critical theorist in me has real concerns about the more data, the fewer faces.
Yeah.
It's just so much fun. 17,000, 59,000. And I took it very seriously, Joe, when you said, we just can't figure out what happens to these guys on the bottom. They just don't get any better. It's like, yeah, let's go back to the data. But we got these people in the bottom quartile, and they're not getting better. And I didn't hear a thing today that helps me think that what we're doing is helping that problem. And if we're not helping that problem, I don't know what the hell we're doing.
So I think that's a really interesting, valid concern, right? And I think part of what I'm trying to say is that if you don't do the big study, you don't know that that bottom quartile is having that experience, right? There are no other easy ways to get at that information. So it's part of why it's so valuable to do it, because it points you to it. But you can't stop there, and that's why we need all of the methods and all of the approaches, right? Each one of them is going to do something different. All of them together give us a landscape that actually tells us something.
And
Right.
I hope it has faces and not just
Oh yeah, no,
numbers.
absolutely. I mean, I think you can do something as down to one case study all the way up to 50,000 student papers, right? And the question is, how do they talk to each other, right, in order to get a full, complete understanding of what's going on? That sounded like a good segue into Kate, because that's kind of her role. So, thank you.
There we go. Yeah, that's why I was going to make it hard for you guys. So. Okay. Not playing. It's not yet. Okay. Okay, here we go. Thank you.
I just need you to walk over here.
Oh.
Hi guys, my name is Stephanie Phillips. I'm a PhD student here in Rhetoric and Composition, and I'm really excited to have the pleasure of introducing to you one of our former students, Kate Pantelides. Kate earned her PhD in Rhetoric and Composition from USF in 2013, and is currently an assistant professor of writing and rhetoric and the associate director of first-year writing at Eastern Michigan University. In 2014, Kate was awarded the Provost New Faculty Award at Eastern Michigan and has 2 forthcoming articles, one in Composition Forum and another in Across the Disciplines. Kate also has multiple textbook contributions in the field of composition studies, and in 2012 received the award for the best of the independent rhetoric and composition journals for her article titled, "So What Are We Working On? Pronouns as a Way of Re-Examining Composing." While she was here at USF, Kate received recognition for her work as a graduate student, such as the English Graduate Student Achievement Award and the Alma Bryant Award for Outstanding Graduate Student. Today, Kate will be talking about The Takeaway, a workshop for moving from talk to action. Please join me in welcoming Kate Pantelides.
Thank you. So I know it's been a long day, so this is going to be fast, and actually it's a lightning talk. I'll explain that in a moment. So thank you very much for having me. It's really nice and surreal to be back at USF, as you can imagine. I was leaving Michigan, it was 7 degrees when I left, and then it's 65, and everybody's telling me how sorry they are that it's cold here, so I like the cold here. This final workshop will be focused on transforming your responses to today's presentations into actionable items to take home with you to your respective institutions. For those of you webcasting, hopefully this will be a chance for you to plan how you move forward from today's discussions. I'd like to start with a brief Ignite presentation about my experiences getting started as a way to spark some subsequent discussion. So please laugh, because that was my only joke. It was planned ahead of time and written down. For those of you unfamiliar with Ignite, it is a 5-minute presentation form accompanied by slides that advance every 15 seconds. It is purposely fast-paced and visually focused to get things moving, especially late afternoon when everybody's tired. So hang with me if you would, and I will get us started. So today has been inspiring for me and hopefully for you. We've learned about digital tools for approaching, responding to, and assessing writing. Chris Anson asked us to consider projects that might connect student self-sponsored writing practices with academic literacies and opportunities for global community building in affinity spaces. Val Ross drew our attention to her research on the developing peer review culture at UPenn to demonstrate both strategies for teaching for transfer and research methodologies for understanding it. Joe Moxley, our host with the most, collaborated with David Eubanks and Elena Tackett to demonstrate the power of big data, analyzing a corpus of 78,000 peer reviews derived from my reviewers. Suzanne Lane drew our attention to the use of digital tools in writing instruction, focusing on the pedagogical potential of innovative digital tools in writing instruction, and those that are being developed at MIT. Finally, Christiane provided a long view of research strategies and opportunities, helping us understand what these digital tools might mean for writing studies writ large. But if you're anything like me, at the end of a day like this, you have so many ideas, so many potential projects, so many questions, so many references to follow up on. But how do we capture that energy generated today and harness it on Monday morning, or Tuesday morning, or whenever we find a window for our own work? How do we move from ideas to action? How might the tools we've discussed today figure in our planning, given the constraints of our respective institutions? The opportunities we've discussed are global, but our decision-making is ultimately local. To give an example of how I've navigated these questions and tools in my own writing program, I want to provide a small, granular example that I hope will be useful for our discussion this afternoon. Last year at EMU, we embarked on a multi-phase assessment project, really a genre analysis, to better understand our program and its needs. Since genres are tools that get things done, we started by examining the genres that constitute our writing program and asking ourselves, what were they getting done? We looked at our syllabi, curriculum maps, wiki, blog, online resources, and here they are, and most significantly, our outcomes. We wanted to ensure that these genres, these tools, were meeting the exigencies of our program in its current form. We received an internal grant to fund our research, so we had to decide how to choose appropriate tools to assess our existing genres, given the following constraints: our budget, which was modest, institutional context, 2 course releases, our ethos as relatively new JWPAs, and our staff. We decided to start small, focusing on our outcomes. Thus, phase 1 included a survey of all instructional staff. We used the tools at hand. We developed a Google form and submitted it through a program discussion listserv that, though it was developed for this initial purpose, has been a modest but invaluable addition. Phase 2 featured a scaled portfolio reading of 30 randomly sampled portfolios. We used the most important tool available to us, our staff, to read, rate, and subsequently discuss findings. They were compensated generously because such work is never free, and naming the appropriate cost is necessary for such work. Our data from phase 1 and 2 suggested that our existing outcomes, pictured here, were confusing and ambiguous to students and staff. Further, the outcomes were used for both composition courses and our 2-course sequence. These outcomes had been created to meet the program in its previous form, and genre change was warranted. That left us with the question: how can we develop something that might be more tuned to the current needs of our students? Based on the findings from our initial assessment, our outcomes were transformed from what you just saw to this. Phase 3 and Phase 4 are now running concurrently. Phase 3 is a My Reviewers pilot, in which we're examining the potential of a community rubric for our own program. Our final stage, Phase 4, includes student focus groups. Again, we draw from and compensate our staff and students to generate feedback on our revised outcomes and curriculum. I share this story to demonstrate that tools come in all sizes and shapes, and often you have them lying around in your garage or your writing program utility closet, as it were. It's important to first consider the job you need the tool to do, and then examine possible utilities. Further, some jobs are small and they're just as important as the big complex ones. It's important to be mindful of our decisions and recognize that many decisions are global, but individually based. Some decisions are slow, thoughtful ones, while others require jumping at the chance and harnessing an opportunity. So now we turn to you all. Considering the powerful tools introduced, where do we go from here? How do such research projects and initiatives begin for you? In hopes that each of you go home today with a plan, an idea you can enact in your own writing program, research project, or classroom, this final workshop aims to leave you with a tangible takeaway. What tools do you already have at your disposal? If you dream big, what tools do you need? How might these tools foster global citizenship on your campus? So the following exercise is a brief writing exercise, since we're all writing people here, and then we're going to talk for a moment and finish just with a takeaway. So you each hopefully have a handout. If you don't, I'll get you one. This was dreamed up with a few more people in the audience in mind, but that doesn't matter. So if you would, just take 5 minutes, and there's a double-sided handout. So if you see on the front, there's some bubbles. This is a little heuristic to think through a problem, a question, something that you might need a tool for. And Suzanne, as Suzanne was saying earlier, it's important to choose the right tool. And it's worth spending quite a bit of time selecting that tool. And we've certainly found that in our own work at EMU. So if you would, take a minute, maybe think through that a little bit, and then if you would, write a takeaway. And we're just going to do a brief share out, and I think that'll be a nice way to kind of wrap things up today, what you're taking home, what your plan is, if there's a tool that appealed to you, how much you use it in your particular context. Okay? So thank you very much. Yes, please. Pardon? Oh, did you not get one? There are many, 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 many. You can have 4. Thanks. Okay, so please take 5 minutes, and then we're going to talk. Okay, so maybe since it's about 5 minutes, and since we are not so many number, if we could, maybe the mics can come out, and if you would, just share your takeaway from the day, what you hope to bring back to your respective institutions, to your research projects, to your classrooms, to your writing programs, to have a sense of what do we do with the kinds of with the kind of information we discussed today. What does it turn into? Okay, volunteers.
Oh, that's fine.
Stephanie, thanks.
Awesome. Yes. I already introduced myself. I'm Stephanie. Thank you, Kate, very much. I kind of like this reinforcement of things we've gone over. So I don't think Tanya over here wants to talk, but she was talking about cognition. And we are USF people, so we have access to my reviewers, and I am currently working with Joe Moxley on some of the data. Something I took specifically from Valerie Ross's presentation is this emphasis on the rhetorical analysis of what peers are talking about in their papers, which is really interesting because I think we struggle a lot with how are we going to have peers talk about other peers' work. And sometimes if you go back through and look, I've had to have conversations about poor language use. You know, this is not the way you talk to really any other person, actually. That's really rude. So I really like this idea. Right now in 1102, actually what we've been doing in my class this week is visual analysis and going over rhetorical appeals. And I really, really love that comment. I wrote it down because I think, why not apply that same exact concept to here? How are you using appeals in your paper? How is this working as a form of information? As a reader, is this logical? Does this make sense? So I really think that is something that I would like to try to emphasize or have use within the parameters of my reviewers. How can you respond this way to your peer? So.
Great. Yeah. Al's up here.
Back at USF, I have two USF-related questions that I think I would love to study at Penn. And one is what reset means. I really like that kind of that notion, and whether all students experience that. And again, that idea of drilling down to what it means at the level of students. Do they just start over and reset for us? Or you know, what exactly is happening? What's the pattern there? And then secondly, I'm really interested in whether USF's data is going to match ours. I'm excited for us to really get on board with the pilot and see. I mean, one thing I did notice is that instructor-reader variance. The difference is looks identical to our portfolio outside reader and professor changes. The outside readers are much tougher than the teachers. So those are two things, and I already have the tools, you guys.
Right.
You developed it. So
Well, I'm excited also about that because I have the same tool, and we're finding out, we're very early in our analysis, but I'll be interested to do the same kind of comparative analysis.
I really like this idea of looking at the constraints and the available tools, and the discussion really made me think that we don't have the resources for big data analysis. The IT department is overtaxed, and there's just, I can't imagine that happening, at least in the short time frame. But what can happen are a number of small-scale research studies that can, over time, be scaled up. So blended learning initiatives, curriculum development initiatives, portfolio assessment initiatives, all of those things have a kind of a small-scale faculty development piece that can change the culture. And one of the things that we really have going for us is a lot of goodwill on the part of the instructors, and that's something I plan to take advantage of.
Excellent.
One question that I was grappling with was the one that Tian raised via Cheryl Ball about how to share boutique data. And I was initially thinking about how scientists in their open notebook science initiatives and so on have been trying to solve that and wondering whether there were analogies that we could use to how they're going about it. And then I realized that in some ways we may not actually, and thinking also about the constraints of institutional research requirements, because this is all human subjects data, and there's also FERPA to be thinking about. And so when I think about this as a repository of data, it seems very problematic. But I realized actually that potentially the citation project may give us a better way forward. Maybe what we actually need to share is detailed methodology so that we could use the same methodology each on our own boutique data set and then share that. I think that might be something really worth exploring. And I think sharing methodology might be crucial anyway, because as Tian pointed out, most of us actually are not well versed in the wide range of methodologies that are available to us.
Thanks. Chris,
So
please.
I was struck by one of the questions a couple of questions ago having to do with outliers. I'm thinking of that wonderful graph that Joe and his team had up there with so much stuff clustered in the middle and then these ones that sort of fade off to the edges. And this is especially important, it seems to me, in terms of difference, in terms of student, the ways in which students learn and the kinds of dispositions and learning styles that they bring, to some of the new technologies that we're developing. So that's where I think we're right in mixed methods. I mean, and really saying, okay, well, it looks like, the great percentage of students that this is effective for them, but for these students it's not, and why? And does that change, as Suzanne's suggesting, does it change the way in which we think about design? So for example, we've done work with students with screen capture response to their writing, teacher response, and there are always a few, they love it, but there are always a few who really don't like it at all. And it's because it's too face-threatening to them, or because they don't like listening. They want to read comments, so there's a different kind of learning style. And so it seems to me that we've really got to use mixed methods. I mean, look at the outliers as well as the ones in the center. Pull those folks out and say, what's going on here? Why doesn't this system work for you? Then I think we're getting a big, the whole picture of learning.
Really, I agree about the part about mixed methods, and I think a number of people brought that up, that, we can't just do quantitative ways. We need to interview the people, as Chris was just mentioning. We're going to have a lot of ethical and legal obstacles. In the process of developing my reviewers and then having pilots at other universities, I just assumed that, well, we could all share the data. I guess about a week ago, someone shared with me an essay that looked at 50,000 essays that had been written for admission to the University of Texas. And they did a corpus analysis, and they found that use of a high number of functional words as opposed to the use of I was correlated with student success, which was really odd. But they had this note in there that, well, they couldn't share that data. And some people have asked me, well, can you share my reviewers' data? And well, the problem is we say to students, you don't need to put your name on the paper, but they do. So we can't share that data. Universities, rely understandably on external funding, and FERPA is a huge concern. So it's kind of understandable that they're going to be very, very cautious about this data. So I think it's going to be interesting to figure out how we can even access the data and what data can we use and to what degree it needs to be scrubbed. But anyway, my big takeaway, I really liked, I was thinking about what Suzanne said, and I really think the whole thing about reading and summary and paraphrase is something that's really super important, and we just in writing studies have focused so much on writing, and I just really like that part. And the way she was putting, the way she was creating it, not with some kind of machine learning, but with a sorting or prioritizing or ranking of the comments, and the ways she developed dynamic ways to categorize those comments. I thought that was really terrific and really worthwhile. So I guess I just think that it's a new day for writing studies with all these new methods, and that's exciting.
Is there one more in the center here?
Well, I face particular challenges because I'm at a national institution in a developing country that's archipelagic. Our institution is over a couple of islands. And so, of course, digital technology would be just absolutely welcomed, but at the same time, it's expensive. And we don't have a great deal of that sort of technological savvy. So when I think about these tools, I think they're fantastic, and the idea of designing them sounds great, but I wouldn't know where to start of developing my own tools. But at the same time, it's so fascinating to see, you know, okay, well, it's a wonderful idea, for instance, to have this kind of collaborative peer review through a digital medium where people can read each other's and respond and all of that. And I'm thinking, well, are there tools that already exist, like, you know, Moodle or Blackboard or self-service, where the students are already like into that, and can I manipulate those course management tools to include some of that? Or even better, can I use something that the students are already sort of jacked into, like Facebook? Is there a way that I can use Facebook to create those kinds of sort of communities? And I do some of that, but there's some really interesting insights that I got here that I'd like to incorporate into that. Or is there a way that I can kind of partner with institutions? With our institution, is there anyone who's interested in having, as an example, within their network or whatever, archipelagic, you know, international institution? Because we would love that. One thing that I was very interested in coming here is that our institution is in that position where we're trying to defend our writing program as effective, and we need ways to measure outcomes. So it's fascinating to think about how these tools can actually serve to produce that kind of data. And that's wonderful. I'm just not sure that I wanted the students to foot the bill for that, you know. And so how do we perhaps talk about purchasing My Reviewer or something for as a department, and then the students do it. And then I love the idea of students analyzing their own self-sponsored writing and analyzing the rhetorical methods that they're using and comparing them with the kind of things that we're doing in the classroom, so that we can talk on both sides about what's helping and what's hurting both of their forms of writing that they are attempting to appropriate and master, you know, and how can those forms be generative? One of the things that I loved about the Dove commercial conversation is that there was this kind of contra-discourse emerging, as even as Dove sponsors this conversation, the conversation allows for a critique of Dove itself. So there's some really important critical discourse that is being engaged in these forms, and that's the kind of stuff I want to see in my classroom. So, you know, I think on both sides we need to be having students have these conversations about what these structures and strictures of their writing are making possible and limiting as well.
Hey, you know, it's been great to have you all here, and it's so nice we have Tom Peel, who I kind of remember him when he was a doctoral student, Tony Francis, who I do remember very well, Kate Panelides. What a great treat to have you all come back and visit, and I thank the folks who came and the folks who visited on the web. I did get emails through the day, people saying that they found it to be really, they really appreciated the content of the programs, and I thank the, it began, I think, really well with, I can't go back that far. I thank Chris because, I think Tien was saying that he needs a little chip in his shoe so he can be tracked globally because he was coming in from a visit at another university on the way to another university. So we're really just privileged that he could stop here. And I can't say enough for Val Ross, who's just been a terrific partner for us, and thank her for patience, and Suzanne Lane for teaching us more about iAnnotate, which is a great tool in the social marking and all that. And Christiane for just kind of giving us an excellent review of some of the tools out there. And I didn't, I think that it's just a revolution, and so that's really nice to think about that. And I know she has a summer program that she has people come, and for graduate students, I hope that they'll consider going to that. And just thank you, and thank you, Kate, for helping us think about our takeaways. So everybody go out and enjoy the sun and the nice day. And thank you for the IT people who have made this professional.